Hey, everybody. We're here with the Dirt Trail Running Podcast and Coffee with Coaches. I'm Coach Loretta, and here's Coach Reese. So we're here to talk about hills today. You either love them or hate them. What's the old saying? I'm going to go do hills for breakfast. So who all has done some hills for breakfast? So today, as you can tell, we're going to talk about hills. And we kind of got this inspiration for part of our show from Isla Allen, one of our listeners, to learn a little bit more about hills. So I'm going to turn it over to Coach Reese to give us a little intro on hills, and we're going to just kind of walk through and give you some ideas, some suggestions, why to do it, and how that's going to help you improve as an athlete. So,
Awesome.
hey, Coach, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. And yourself?
I'm great.
Awesome. So I wanted to start off today. It's a week, a couple days removed from Earth Day, and I just wanted to say thank you to the community for all of the awesome, awesome messages, DMs, comments, all that cool stuff. Thank you, Ornery, Mule, the volunteers, the entire organization for just putting on such a cool event. It was great, and I just kind of wanted to humanize some things that are going on in my next week here, because I think that when people know me and they see, like winning races and stuff like that, it's easy to think like, oh, like things are so easy. But I wanted to start off by saying, like there's needs and there's wants in life. And I think it's pretty important to prioritize what you need to get done as a human being and a part of your community, a family member. And there's wants that we have that contribute to our own personal satisfaction and goals. So I think it's something to say that we need to be able to take care of those things that we need to take care of and then get to our running goals. Over this next week, I'm going to be moving. Things are pretty stressful. I'm still working full time, trying to make sure all my athletes are taken care of. So I woke up this morning and I wanted to go for a nice long run, to de-stress my mind, to enjoy the sunrise like I needed to. But then I have these needs of being a coach, being a family member, and also belonging to a clinic with which I love, ChiroFit out here in Barrington. So I rearranged my schedule last minute. I was washing my face and I was kind of stressed that I wouldn't be able to get everything done today. And I realized, what I need to do is I need to be there for my family. I need to be there for you guys. I need to be there for my athletes. And I need to be there and take care of these things I have to do in order to keep life moving forward. So being a week out from Earth Day, I decided let's take care of all of these life things that I need. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I thought this was a good anecdote. After putting so much time and effort into training and having a good race result, it's important to step back and say what needs to be taken care of in life. So I decided to wake up this morning, take care of my needs, and then go outside for about 15 minutes just to soak in the sunshine before being here for all of you guys today. So I just wanted that to be a nice anecdote and to be a coaching moment to say, sometimes in order to take care of our stresses and be our best runner and athlete in the long term, for the short term, we need to take care of these priorities. So in your life, think about what are priorities that need to be taken care of and what are wants and desires, and try to structure those accordingly. So that way you can be the best person, the best community member, the best family member, and the best athlete that you can be long term. So I think that kind of humanizes everything that's been going on this past week for me. Again, thanks to everybody for all the great comments and all the great things that have been shot my way over Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. So I greatly appreciate it. But okay, I'm gonna step down off of my
Hold up a
soapbox.
second. Yeah, hold up a second. That was amazing what you just shared, and I fully agree with that. But we need to give you a little bit of a shout out to talk a little bit about Earth Day. Seemed like it was so long ago, but it was just last weekend. So do you want to just kind of give a little highlight of your race?
Yeah, I would love to, but I do want to keep the focus of today on hill training. So I'll give you guys a little sneak peek. The day I took it out strong, I took it out fast, and I stayed within myself, and I tried to be as consistent as possible and not stop at aid stations. I executed my race plan, stuck to my guns, and ran a race that I knew that I could finish strong in, and I prepared for it. I practiced my fueling. I practiced, getting out onto the course, tackling the hills, finishing strong. So I think, like the real race recap here is just, plan the work and then work the plan and try to line everything up on race day and shoot your shot, believe you can do it. And don't let anybody tell you can't or have doubt creep into your head. So have goals, shoot for them as hard as you can, and let the chips fall where they do.
Excellent. And it worked out just beautifully for you. Course record by what, 5 or 7 seconds? It was a tight finish, but you made it.
Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, and we're going to be doing some more too on Ornery Mule Racing about that Earth Day experience too. So if you guys want to hear more about it, like stay tuned. But yeah, thanks for taking the time to mention that too, Loretta.
For sure.
Cool. Well, on to hills. So for hill training, I guess the first thing I want to do is define what is a hill. So I get this all the time from athletes whenever I put hill training into their logs is, well, what is a hill? How steep? What percentage? What grade? All of these questions. And my easy response is, if it's not flat, it's a hill. So that can be a 3%, that can be a 5%, that can be an 8%. So it's not like, I don't want to put such tight parameters on what exactly defines a hill. If it's not flat, it makes you breathe harder to get up, then that's the hill. Loretta, how do you tackle the question, what is a hill?
I'm pretty much the same as well. And sometimes we do try to find certain hills to kind of match the terrain that they're going to be racing on. So we'll try to find a hill that maybe will be the same steepness and incline up, so that they can kind of practice that, but the same. And for us in the Midwest, we don't have a lot of big hills perhaps to be climbing. So if you can find a hill, use a hill.
Perfect. Yep. I think that's great. And I think too that we can get really granular with detailing exactly what percentage grade you should be running, right? But the key thing here is that a hill is going to make you increase your power output in order to get up it. So we can really think about a hill being a good equal ground between speed and endurance, speed and strength. So we all know that burning feeling that happens in our quads and our glutes and in our hamstrings, and the increased effort that we have to give in order to get up a hill. So it's no surprise that it does take more effort to get up them. It's no surprise that it requires more power because you have to push your body against gravity. So, anything where you can feel that it is more of a stressful effort than just running on flat. That's what I would define a hill. So I wanted to get that right out of the way, because now as we talk about hill training, we're going to detail different workouts. We're going to detail different ways that you can structure your training to use hills. But there's a great question, and that's, if I'm running a flat race, why would I use hills? And I guess I just wanted to ask you, Loretta, like, what comes to mind when you get that question?
So I do think that hills can help you build strength for the flats, so that it can make you a faster flat runner than just running flats. And it also can be less impactful on your body to do hills for your training. I think hill strides are a great way to incorporate hills also, so that you can kind of work on that leg speed turnover, but maybe not overdo it. So hills can be used for, I think, a few different reasons.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's amazing. When we talk about like race specificity, some people will say, hey, well, if I'm running a flat race or if I'm running a track race, why the heck would I be using hills in my training? And I think to back up, we can say, depending on the period of your training, if you're not like in a very specific phase where you're dialing in for one particular race, there's a lot of benefits that you can have even if you're running a flat race. Say if you're more than like 6 to 8 weeks out from, a very specific flat race that you're planning for, they can be really good to help you increase your power output, which is, when we talk about increasing power output, some people might think, oh, that sounds a lot like strength training, which it is. Hills are going to be the most specific type of strength training that you have for running, because you are doing that running motion. You're using those stride biomechanics, but increasing your power output to get uphill. So let's say, you have more than 6 or 8 weeks to your next event, and it's right before you're kind of dialing in and getting specific for that particular flat event. If you wanted to add in some hill strides, that is a great way to make sure that you increase your power production, you increase your effort, but you don't necessarily put as much biomechanical demand on your legs as running on flat. As we all know, hamstring strains can occur because you go out sprinting too hard, or if anybody starts up speed work after not really preparing for it, you'll feel that like, man, my calves are really crunched, my hamstrings are strained on me, things like that. And hills can actually be a much more gentle way to increase the effort, increase the aerobic demand, but also increase the power that your stride has. So I like that you mentioned hill strides, because that's one thing that I really use for my athletes in order to prepare their legs for flatter, faster running. Right now, I'm actually working with an athlete. He's going to be starting up next week. And for the first couple of weeks, we actually have, 2 days out of the week where he's going to be doing some hill strides. He's going to be doing 5 hill strides a time, just because I want his legs turning over quicker. I want his heart beating a little faster, but I don't want him to put all of that impact onto his legs like a flat stride would. After a couple of weeks, we're going to start to transition to flat strides before we get into more like speed work and tempo work, and then race specific work. So that's how I handle kind of that before you get really specific for your race. Of course, when you get specific for your race, maybe 6 or 8 weeks to your goal event, if you're running a flat race, we absolutely want to practice, hey, what type of ground are you going to be running on? What type of distances are you going to be going? And start to plan out more key workouts in order to lend you to having a better performance at that particular event. So if you tend to gravitate more towards flatter, faster races, that doesn't mean that you should never incorporate hills whatsoever. It just means, hey, maybe you structure those a little bit differently into your season. Because of course, just like we all know, it's important to get your speed work in, even though our ultra marathons are run at a very aerobic pace, because of course that speed work is going to be on a continuum of aerobic development that is going to benefit you as a global runner throughout the season and throughout your career. Kind of like hills. If we are only focused on flat and fast, that doesn't mean that hills have zero benefit for our training or for our legs. So again, I see the biggest benefits being increase of power output, increase of cardiovascular demand, but a decrease in injury risk just because it's not as taxing on your hamstrings, or your calves for that matter, if you're just doing like 30-second pickups as a hill stride.
I would agree. And I think though, if you're training for a flat race, you're not going to incorporate as many hills as you may if you're training for something that there's going to be a lot of climbing. So it might not be as much of a focus. But I also think when we're looking at a hill, if we're doing hills, we need to think of that as a harder effort than a recovery type day. So, you want to make sure you pair that in your weekly schedule so you're not doing it back to back with something hard.
Absolutely. Yep. And like I mentioned before, a particular athlete that I'm working with right now, that is going to be his workout days. And then we have a recovery day afterwards.
Yeah.
So although it's not incredibly taxing on the body, of course, anything that requires an effort above what we consider easy or conversational or nose breathing requires an extra little bit more care and attention to recovery. And if y'all want some good recovery tips, listen to our last podcast. But yeah, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you mentioned that. So that's a good wrap up on why we would use hills and when we would use hills, even if you were running a flatter race, because it has benefits both for our legs and for our lungs. Of course, too, if you're running a very hilly race, it would absolutely behoove you, because that is very specific to the type of running that you're going to be doing during your race. So Loretta, how would you prepare somebody with hill training if they were running a hill race?
Okay, so that would be something that would be incorporated once or maybe twice a week, depending on the level of the athlete. Somebody that's coming in as more of a beginner athlete may be only able to handle, a day of maybe hill type interval type work, but also incorporating it into, I like to put it into the long run, doing some rolling hills, getting used to that. Or, if it's going to be a trail run, whatever type of run it is, trying to find an area that's kind of going to mimic that a little bit. So your body gets used to the type of terrain that you're going to be running on.
Absolutely. When I personally structure hill workouts for a hilly race, I like to think about the hill in two parts, the uphill and the downhill. The uphill is going to require a lot more cardiovascular demand, and it's not going to be as taxing on the body, but the downhill doesn't require quite as much cardiovascular demand, but it really beats up your body. So what I do when I start people training on hills for a hill specific race is I'll take a look and see, okay, what types of climbs are there going to be in the hills? Like how tall are they? How much elevation are you going to gain? About what percentage are the hills going to be? If we're talking about Earth Day that just happened previously, if you can't get out onto the course, you can try to look at somebody's Strava and see, okay, what is the percentage? What is the climb here? What is the rise for the amount of run that you do? You can calculate a percentage, and then you can understand that, like, hey, there's going to be some punchy climbs that are going to be about 12%, or, around a certain percent. So then what you can do is you can either go onto a treadmill, or you can find some trails or streets around your house that will mimic some of that elevation gain. Personally, here I live in Barrington, and for Earth Day, I trained on some road hills that are actually outside my house, which are great because they're about like 12 to 15% or so. So it's great because if you do some hill repeats going up those, then you can get somewhat specific with what's going to be on the trail, at least as far as how your biomechanics and joint angles are going to work. And joint angles are something to really think about when we're running, because of course we want to be able to put out effort in the way that we're going to be using our joints during a race. And that's something that Steve Magnus is, very, very known for, is working biomechanics of races, or of particular runs. So if you wanted any more information about that, you can definitely take a look at his books that he's written, his training manuals. He's a fantastic author and coach. I'm a huge fan of his. So definitely give him a look if you wanted more information, or his idea, his philosophy about using joint angles for optimizing your running. So now that's the uphill. And that's where I would start an athlete is, hey, let's work on the uphills. Let's work on your cardiovascular capability. The downhills, the adaptations are really quick to come with the eccentric muscle demand. That's the, running downhill where your muscles are lengthening under tension. It's the most violent type of contraction that our muscles are capable of. So, it's usually not the uphills that are going to tank you out during a race. It's the downhills. So I do like to incorporate a little bit of downhill work with my athletes after a couple weeks of getting used to the uphills, just because, we definitely need to be durable. And those are something that, I definitely take a little bit more intention with when I prescribe them to athletes to do, because they are going to leave you a lot more taxed, and you're not going to know it until 2 days later. That's the DOMS effect, right? You go out for a hard run, a hard race, that you use your quads, but then 2 days later you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I can't even get up the stairs. What the heck happened? I didn't feel this bad when I first finished my race. That's the delayed onset muscle soreness, and downhills are definitely a primary cause of that phenomenon. So if we can introduce those to an athlete in small bursts, small rounds, we can at least familiarize or get the body, kind of dip the athlete's toes into the water of downhill, so to speak, meaning, we can start to get your body adapting to what it's going to have to survive come race day. So of course, uphill is really important. Downhill is important too, but downhills need to be programmed a little bit more cautiously, a little bit more gently, because as a coach, I don't want to program somebody downhills, have them say, you know what, I completed the workout, I felt great. 2 days later, I couldn't even get up and go for my run. So as a coach, that's something that I keep in mind is we need to work the downhills, but be a little bit more gentle on those.
Right. I mean, recently, we've talked on previous shows, I had an athlete just run Boston, and that's a course that you have to be prepared for downhills because it can really tear your quads up, so that was a focus, of her training was working on that. And I had friends just recently run Revel Mount Charleston in Vegas, and it's a marathon that starts at the top of the mountain and it goes down. It's 5,000 feet of loss. And, so my friend, had a great race, but she's like, I was well prepared, but my quads still hurt, after the race. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's always going to be, like, on race day, we are trying to push our body further than we believe it capable to be, right? Like, there's always surprises come race day in how hard we can actually push, right? During training though, we want to make sure that, like, we don't really cross that line, because I want to make sure that somebody is gradually building over time, as opposed to pulling a hero move in training. So, like, by all means, like, if you're in a race, pull those hero moves, like hit those downhills, hit those uphills for sure. Yeah. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind.
I think another part of looking at hills and hill workouts is thinking about rate of perceived exertion, right? So thinking about how that feels, keeping that effort the same as you're going up as you are when you're, on the flats, because we don't want to totally increase our heart rate to get up that hill, because that's kind of going to be counterproductive for you. I'm not talking about when we're doing hill interval workouts, but I'm talking about generally, running hills in a training run that's maybe rolling hills, or in a race that has hills, thinking about that and trying to maintain that, in the race. So you're not, putting too much effort into the hills.
Absolutely. I think, now would probably be a good time to transition and start talking about hill workouts that we can do
Okay.
and kind of get a little bit more specific. So we talked about, like hill training, depending on the period, is good for your flat races. It's also very critical for your hilly races that you're planning on doing. But what does a hill workout actually look like? So I think we mentioned the uphill stride, right? And I personally define a stride as a total of 30 seconds. The first 10 seconds, you're building up to like an 85 to 90% effort. The middle 10 seconds, you're holding that effort. And then the final 10 seconds, you're slowly ramping back down to an easy pace. So I'll typically give athletes anywhere from 5 to 8 of those at a time. If we're going uphill, I always tell people walk the downhill, just so that way we can avoid some of that really heavy downhill eccentric contraction, just to make sure that we don't blow out somebody's quads during training. It's also a great time to take a really good rest and recovery walking back down to the start. So that way, by the time you get to the bottom of that hill, you are ready to give it another go,
Right.
So I think it's important with the stride to, when you start the stride, just to make sure that you are ready for that stride. You're not still huffing and puffing and gassed. So usually I call that about 2 minutes, but more importantly, I tell my athletes, like, I want you to do the strides and be stoked at the start of every stride. I don't want you to feel like you're barely hanging on. It's not a hard workout. Uphill strides should be fun.
Yep, I agree. And I think a good way to tackle strides, especially on trails and such, is to do it more as in a fartlek sort of style. Because the hills are going to be kind of randomly in there. And so using those hills as you approach them to do a stride.
Yep, absolutely. Fartleks are a great way to go. If I plan an athlete to do a trail run and to do some hill fartleks, sometimes what I'll tell them is, you know what, go out for an hour, go out onto the trails, and I'll say like hard hills in the first half, and then hard downhills in the second half.
Yep.
Where what that means is, okay, for the first half, say if you're going to go out for an hour, for the first 30 minutes, you're going to go a little bit harder up the hills, maybe not like an all out effort, but an RPE of like a 7 out of 10. So, it takes a little bit more effort than just easy. But then on the downhills, you're going very easy. You're recovering on those guys. And then by the time the flats come, you can then resume your normal easy pace, right?
Right.
And then at the tail end of the 30 seconds, then we're going really easy up the hills, and we're just trying to take the downhills, not super fast, but with a little bit more gusto than an easy type of effort.
Sure.
So that's a good fartlek that I like to do, just to make sure that we get that uphill work practice as well as that downhill work practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can blend hill workouts with tempo runs, with VO2 max. You can blend them in your long run, just, make them work for you as you need to. But remember, thinking about them as a workout, rather than a recovery.
Yep, absolutely. This is a Steve Magnus idea that I like. He calls it tempo runs with stuff in the middle.
Okay.
I call them broken tempos. What I'll do is, I'll warm up for about 10 minutes, and then I'll do a 20-minute tempo effort where I'm going out at my tempo pace. And then I stop at the base of a hill. I get a little bit of recovery, and then I'll do 5 to 8 pretty much uphill strides. They're more like 30-second bouts. Instead of ramping up for 10 seconds, I'm kind of going a little bit harder from the start. Like, it's definitely a hill interval of 30 seconds, walking back down, do about 5 to 8 of those, and then resume another tempo afterwards. What I really like about that workout is it teaches you to get into that tempo pace after already using up a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. So you kind of put a little fatigue on your legs, but then also teach them, hey, we got some fatigue on us, but we still need to operate at that intensity that is faster or more effortful than easy.
Mm-hmm.
So
sounds like a fun workout.
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah, hills with stuff in the middle.
I like the name too.
Yeah. I think he even uses, if you don't have hills, Magnus uses squat jumps. He'll use body weight squats. Sometimes he'll have his athletes do burpees just to get the muscles moving a little bit more forcefully, which again, running uphill increases the force demand out of somebody's legs. So we kind of tax your fast twitch fibers and then try to get your legs moving at that perceived race intensity.
That was a workout that I used to do with the high school students when I was coaching high school. Is we would have certain points where you would do burpees and then go on, and that was always a fun workout.
Yep. I just wanted to mention too, that was a personal classic of mine for preparing for Earth Day. Like I said, I live right next door to some paved hills here. So even though it's not on a trail, right, like I'm still getting that biomechanics, like joint angles of going up a hill. So even though it's on pavement, it's still a worthy hill for sure. But I did the same thing, and it was huge because in Earth Day, if you get onto the course, and if you get onto the course early, and then you're able to experience what you're gonna feel on race day, you'll notice that at the start finish line, it's a lot flatter, but that comes right at the tail end of doing a bunch of hill works, or a bunch of hill repeats. So being able to do those hill repeats, going up and down, but then also being able to cruise nice and flat was very critical for that portion of the race for sure. So that's why I incorporated those.
Nice.
Another hill workout that I particularly like is just the hill interval, going uphill for a particular amount of time.
Yep.
And I usually structure these by time. I don't really structure them by distance. The reason is because we can kind of target different types of energy zones or energy production methods by the length of time that we're going uphill. So for me, usually that looks like, 30-second hills, 90-second hills, and 2-minute hills.
Mhm.
So we oftentimes don't have like a straight 2-minute upward hill here, right? Like you see, if anybody follows some people out west on Strava, they were able to go up a mountain and they can go for 45 minutes or an hour straight uphill and not have to incur any downhills. We don't really have that luxury out here. So I try to stick to that 30-second, 60-second, and then 2-minute type of time frame. Just because in 30 seconds, you can get a really good, powerful hill stride, which is going to tax your anaerobic system pretty well. You're not really going to tap into too much aerobic storage, but that's good for repeatability of continually hitting those hard, punchy climbs. I usually use those a little bit further away from a particular race because at these ultra distances, we definitely want to hammer more at steady running and controlled running. But I think that is a good introduction to a specific block where we're trying to work more towards longer hills and sustained hills. Getting your power production uphill would be pretty important. So that's something that I personally did for Earth Day as well. About 2 weeks ago is when I started working on my hard punchy hills of about 15 to 30 seconds. 60-second hills are really great for getting rid of some of the anaerobic capacity that your body has and starting to tap into more aerobic system. So what that's going to feel like when you're doing a 60-second hill is the first 15 to 20 seconds is going to feel fairly easy because your body is using some pretty instantaneous energy that it has. And then all of a sudden your breathing is really going to ramp up. By the time you get to the end of 60 seconds, you should be gasping like a fish. It should almost feel like a VO2 max effort. If you pace it right as well, you will not have changed velocity. It will just continue to get harder as the hill goes longer. For 2-minute hills, those are definitely run at a lower RPE, more like a tempo or a threshold type of RPE, where you are controlled the entire time, but of course you are breathing fairly heavily, almost at like a half marathon type of effort or intensity. So those are great to start to introduce the body into being able to work going up a hill and feel what it feels like to get those joint angles operating while your body is slowly accumulating lactate and hydrogen ion. So you're going to feel that burn during those 2 minutes for sure. But then when that transitions into doing more long runs with rolling hills, being more specific to the race demands, you'll be able to continue at a faster perceived effort of being steady, no matter what type of bumping and rolling hill comes at you. So I think that's a great way to, get the power production you want out of the legs via the 30-second hills, get the anaerobic repeatability that you will out of the 60-second hills, and then be able to teach your body how to just keep grinding away at that threshold pace with the 2-minute hills. And then by the time you get about like 4 to 6 weeks out from a race, we're doing steady hills and we're making sure that we can feel our RPE change as the terrain changes. And that's when I talk with my athletes about, hey, like even though you hit a hill, your pace is going to slow. Don't stress about it. Your pace is going to slow, but as long as your RPE is there, you can pick up the pace coming down the hill as long as you don't absolutely tax yourself going uphill. So I think that's kind of my general structure for including hill intervals throughout a season in order to prepare somebody for a longer ultra marathon.
Sure. Yeah. And I also use the same similar time based is how I also program them, and sometimes mix them up. So maybe you're doing that minute or 90-second repeat, and then maybe you're going to a 30-second, kind of mixing that in, kind of like I guess you would call it a ladder maybe of, different distances.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing, just a personal anecdote from Earth Day, I think I keep bringing up Earth Day, but I think it was so, proximal to where we're at right now that there's a lot of listeners that are going to be able to say, hey, yeah, I felt that last Saturday. With a course that is so punchy in the back half and relatively flat on the front half with some rollers, it's definitely important to include all of those types of hills when you're training, because during that race, there's sections where you kind of just have to grind slowly uphill. And then there's sections where it's super punchy and it's like, man, you kind of just have to get up and over it, right? So if we can get the body experienced to those different types of hills in, like primarily maybe like these 6 to 10 weeks out from the race, that's where you can start to put together those puzzle pieces of, okay, cool. I know what it's like to have to boost up a hill a little bit harder. I know what it's like to have to grind away at a particular hill. And this is pertinent to everybody, right? Like everybody is going up these hills at different speeds for their efforts. But the key thing here is that the effort is the same. So you got to talk with your coach about what types of efforts you should be feeling during these hill repeats. I always tell my athletes, for a 30-second hill repeat, like I want you to feel like, man, you are giving it hard. Like it's
out of breath.
Exactly, right? So that doesn't matter if it's a 6-minute mile up a hill. It doesn't matter if it's a 15-minute hike up the hill. If you're feeling that intensity, awesome, job well done. Now we got to translate that feel and that intensity to where you're going to use it if you do use it during the race. Same thing with the 60-second hills and the 2-minute hills. So if you got to talk with your coach about, hey, what should I be feeling during this and why is it going to pertain to my race? That's a question that they should be able to answer. So we can definitely help you out with that.
Yeah. So we've talked about different kind of workouts that we can do. Let's talk a little bit about, we're talking about just running the hills right now. What about athletes that are doing longer, harder events that may not be running all of the hills?
Oh, absolutely. Shout out to one of my athletes right now. He's preparing for Y East. That's coming up in just over 50 days here. We were talking, and our strategy for that race is going to be to try to increase his slowest moving pace. And this is something that Ian Sharman talks about, slowest moving pace. If you can get your slowest pace, but still comfortable and sustainable for the race to be something that is above cutoffs, then you're in great shape. Let's say, a lot of races here, let's say they average about like a 15 to a 20 minute per mile average cutoff time, especially for 100-milers. I think it's usually about like 18 to 20 minutes per mile average pace before the cutoffs. If we can make your slowest moving pace 16 minutes per mile, then we don't need to worry about hitting those cutoffs, right? So our strategy going in is, hey, let's train that hike, because that's going to be the slowest portion of your race when you're hiking uphill, when you're hiking on flats because you're trying to get some energy in, or you're trying to mess around with your pack, right? So our strategy is going to be for him to increase his speed on his treadmill 3.5 to start on flat, warm up for about 10 minutes, and then start to arrow up the percentage on the incline until we get to this grade, this percentage where he feels like he's giving almost like not quite a tempo effort, but like a good, sustainable, powerful hiking effort. Because if we can get him used to that, to the point where his body just naturally wants to take care of that on the uphills and on the flats, then he doesn't have to spend any mental energy thinking, am I going fast enough? His body's just like, all right, this is the speed we're going, 3.5 miles an hour, 3.8, 4.0, whatever it is. So that's something that, if the listeners want to listen to more, Ian Sharman has a lot of great podcasts that he's done. Go on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, type in his name. He's got a bunch of great stuff on Trail Runner Nation detailing his philosophy about that. I think that is great for a lot of people that are trying to come in above cutoffs, is not like, hey, let's just keep trying to make you faster at the run, because a lot of these times it's the hiking uphill or the hiking on flats that is going to really add time to our cutoffs, or I guess take time away from our race.
Right.
So if you can hike faster, hike with purpose, hike uphill harder, then that's great. You don't necessarily have to run faster. You just have to be able to then pick it up where you can pick it up.
Right, right. So I think the gold standard is like what, 15 to 18 minutes to try to be able to be able to power hike that amount. So that can keep you under cut off. And I think a good way to do that, you mentioned a little bit with a treadmill, is, doing that incline work on there, even thinking about the total elevation of the race that you'll be climbing. And I often give my athletes goals for the week, like, okay, this week, let's hit this much elevation to be, so your body is prepared for all of that climbing of a big race that you'll be doing a lot of climbing with too. Plus,
Yep.
I think it mentally prepares you too, not just physically.
Oh, for sure. And I want to play devil's advocate here because, like personally, I'm coaching some people that are in Flatland, Illinois here, Southern Illinois. And there's literally not a hill to be found. There's no type of incline, whatever it is. So that's where, if you do have that one hill, doing those repeats is going to be fairly important. Hitting that treadmill is going to be fairly important. Or even doing some strength training is going to be
Yes.
really important. If you can increase your body's ability to produce power, then all you have to do is train it to sustain for a little bit longer, right? Let's say that your body can only put out, I'm going to use watts here because that's the technical term, 400 watts of power. If you need to run your race under cutoff, and that's going to require an average of 350 watts of power, all of a sudden, like you are operating really close to your maximum, Whereas if we can increase that maximum amount of power that your body can produce, all of a sudden, the force that you have to, or the power that you have to dish out is a lot less of a percentage of what you can actually maintain. It's the same thing with like threshold training, right? If we raise your threshold, all of your easier paces feel way easier, right? So if we can increase the amount of force that your muscles are capable of producing, then it doesn't quite take as much effort in order to get up that hill, with which it requires more force to do so.
For sure. So part of when I do look at like an elevation goal, we talk about the elevation that they do, maybe if they don't have any hills, because I did have an athlete that was training for Silver Rush in Leadville, and they were basically had one hill as well. So we utilized that hill, but we also utilized stairs. And for every step, we counted that as elevation. Every step was about a foot. And, so we calculated that way, doing steps onto maybe a box jump, we counted that. And also anything that was on the treadmill, so there's a lot of different ways I think that you can build strength for hills without hills, right? Incorporating that into strength training, plyometrics. I think there are different ways to build that. Do you want to talk a little bit about some good strength training movements for hill work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for most people year round, doing some sort of squat or squat variation is going to be huge. Again, if we think about the biomechanics that it takes to run up a hill, your hip is going to be more flexed, your knee is going to be more flexed. And some of those joint angles can be really mimicked through squatting or step ups or lunging variations, anything that is going to increase your hip flexion, your knee flexion, more than just running on flat. So I'd be happy to expand on that more with anybody that does have questions about what hip flexion and knee flexion means. But for short, that just means, finding ways to incorporate these squats, lunges, step ups into your routine. At least, body weight is fine. Body weight is great. If that's all that you can afford, it's way better than nothing. If you have some sort of weight that you can hold in your hands too, whether that's dumbbells or a heavy backpack, like that is fantastic. So there's great ways to go about tricking the body into lifting more weight than, particularly using like quote unquote, like strength equipment. I know that for some people having access to strength equipment or a gym might be a little bit hairy, but if you hold something heavy, your body doesn't know if you're holding a couple books or if you're holding a dumbbell. So, there's great ways to incorporate strength training, regardless of what type of equipment you have. Some other things like plyometrics. Plyometrics are going to be those quick things where you're kind of popping off of the ground, such as like doing some jump rope, maybe doing some depth jumps, and then some power-based movements are going to be those things like box jump ups, where you just start from one position, you come down and you pop up onto a box really quick. Or other power movements, such as a little bit heavier weight, moved at a little bit quicker of a velocity. So there's great ways to program that out. So That's something that I really like talking with my athletes too. I think sometimes that stuff can kind of get lost in the weeds. My focus for athletes is going to be injury prevention first and foremost, so that way you can continue your runs and continue your running workouts. Usually that is really where I try to add the power and plyometric type of movements, just because running up a hill as a power workout is going to be a lot more specific to running up your hill in a race as opposed to doing a box jump. Sometimes doing those power and those plyometrics a little too effortfully or too forcefully or too soon in one's training program can be almost a little bit more of an injury risk. So I do like to talk with my athletes specifically about, like, hey, what are your goals? What are your likes and dislikes? What's going to be safe for you to do in the gym? Some people don't have that access and that equipment, and that's fine. We don't need it. But yeah, those are fantastic options for people that live in flat areas in order to increase force production and thereby increase power production. I just want to mention too that there's a bunch of ultra runners that have done great things in the space. Casey Lichtig, for example, she's in like Flatland, Nebraska, and she's a Western States winner. She's just an all-around badass. So it's not a requirement that you live in the mountains to run a great mountain race or run a great hill race. There's ways to give the body the same stimulus without a mountain in front of us.
Right, for sure. So we've talked a little bit now about, strength training and how you can use that ancillary to help you with running hills. Give us your secrets, Reese. How do you run fast and uphill, and how do you run fast downhill? What are some
form
we should be doing?
Yeah, form for sure. Okay, so like the cool and the often heard tips for form definitely apply to hill running, right? Like, you want to get your hips underneath your body. You want to push through with the glutes. You don't want to overstride. You want to keep an upright and tall posture. You don't want your shoulders to cave forward and close off those lungs from taking in oxygen. So those are all great ways or all great things to think about while you are going up a hill. We've all seen that person on a treadmill at the gym or on the stair stepper who is collapsed forwards, like just barely holding on to the rails, but still moving their legs. I hate seeing that because it does nothing to do it does nothing for your core in training your core to be able to hold your upper body while your legs have to produce force. So only go as fast as you can while maintaining that good form for sure. So while you're running downhill, we want to increase your cadence just so that way we can take less forceful or less impactful steps. So of course, when you're running downhill and you're trying to go fast, your cadence is going to pick up, your stride is going to get a little bit shorter, right? We've all gone downhill where it's just like boom, 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 boom. But we don't really want that. We want nice, short, light, quick steps that'll help curtail some of the damage that happens to your legs. We also want to lean into the hill, whether we're going uphill or downhill, right? Like running is an action of taking your center of mass, your center of gravity, and having it fall forwards controllably. So if you're going downhill, you do want to have a slight forward lean just to foster that center of gravity to want to go down the hill instead of being leaned back and kind of braking while going downhill. When we're going uphill, we want to be leaning into the hill to try to get that center of mass forwards. So that way our legs can then kind of push us upwards. So just like with any type of running strap, we do want a nice little forward lean, but we don't want our upper body to cave in at the top or cave in at the shoulders.
Or
so
at the waist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So long story short, we want to keep that tall posture. We want to keep the shoulders open so that the chest can expand and contract and bring air into our system. We want to drive through with our hips and our glutes. And then when we're going downhill, we want to increase that stride. We want to lean forward slightly into the hill. We want to trust ourselves, and we want to engage with the ground and constantly be scanning what is coming up ahead of me. So that way you don't accidentally hit that that little shooter that clips your toe and sends you down. But I guess that's another huge thing about hill running is, develop it in training so that way you can have the confidence to go a little bit faster, right? And that's why earlier in the beginning of the episode, I'll oftentimes give people hill fartleks where I don't tell them to scream down hills, but go a little bit faster than what is your usual, because it takes a little bit quicker processing speed from your brain in order to visually see the input that's coming up in front of you, process it in your mind, and then execute an action to the rest of your body to avoid that rock or to step over that branch, right? So we can't take somebody from going from a walk down a hill to go screaming down a hill instantly. We kind of need to also train the brain to be able to process that information a little bit quicker. So yeah, those are all the critical components for sure.
Okay, awesome. What about your arms? What should we be doing with your arms?
With your arms, when we're going uphill, you want to think about that nice arm carriage that that we all know and love. We want to keep those arms a little bit closer to your chest, because the closer they are to your body, the less rotational momentum is going to be twisting your torso, and the less energy you're going to have to expend in order to sway your arms. So if they're a little bit closer, a little bit tighter, a little bit more upright, that is awesome. Otherwise, just relax with the shoulders. Try to think about relaxing everything except for your legs. Your legs should be producing all the power. If you tighten up your shoulders, if you hunch up like this, if you cave forwards, you're expending energy for all those muscular contractions that aren't actually helping you go uphill, right? So we want to keep that arm carriage nice and loose and kind of close to the body and let the legs do the work. When we're going downhill, throw all that out the window. Let your arms go whichever way they want to go. When you're going downhill, it's more about balance and control here. There were definitely points during Earth Day when you're going downhill and I have one arm kind of floating off to one side and the other's kind of going to this side, and then you're kind of leaning into the hill like this and all that. And then once you get control and you're down the hill and your arms just naturally want to get back into that stride, let them. But when you're going downhill, make sure all of your attentional focus is going to be on foot placement. If anybody wants to see like a great video too, go onto YouTube and type in like Kilian Jornet downhill running. There's a bunch of videos by, I think his name is Biel Rafiels. Okay, but if you just YouTube Kilian Jornet running downhill, you will see a couple of videos. When he's going downhill, there's no such thing as a tight arm carriage. It's all like balance and stabilization and trying to athletically maneuver your way down the trail. When he's going uphill, that's when we're trying to be really economical with the rest of our body, so that way we can not waste any energy that could be used for forward propulsion.
Okay, those are some great tips. So I think that we would be amiss if we didn't just mention real quickly a little bit about trekking poles and hills. I know that that's a question a lot of people have in events, like, should I use trekking poles to get me up the hills? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. I personally subscribe to the ideas and the teachings from Coach Jason Koop on his podcast. If anybody goes into podcast player of your choice and looks for his Koopcast, he's got a lot of great stuff on poles. The long and the short of poles for me is that, they do increase effort a little bit because your arms have to be doing something. Like you have to be using muscular energy in your arms in order to propel yourself forwards. But the nice thing in these longer races, these 50 milers, 100Ks, 100 milers, is although you are increasing your effort when you're using poles, you are decreasing the amount of abuse that your legs will take going up and going downhill. So you're kind of trading economy in running, because it's a lot more, or a lot less efficient for your body to carry poles, carry weight in your hands, and then have to use your arms, as opposed to just going without the poles. But at the tail end of a 100 miler after 50 miles, of course, if preservation of your legs and preservation of your muscles is going to be the make or break to your race, then they're absolutely going to be a huge benefit. There's a lot of people too that use poles just as a reminder to get into that power hike, right? They can help support some of the upper body. So if you have like a heavy pack on, like people in UTMB use poles because they have such large amounts of mandatory gear required that sometimes when you're going uphill and you're leaning forwards, that weight's going to be pulling on your back. And if you are able to put a little bit of body weight on your arms, it can definitely take less abuse from, or it can give less abuse to your lower back while you're leaning forwards like that. And it can also take some muscular effort off of your legs. So poles are a great idea if durability in these longer races is important. And of course, we got to make sure that the race is okay with you using poles. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So you got to check with your race director. You got to check with the organization. They are not mandatory for a great performance. Lots of people run 100 milers without poles. It really comes down to what do you need to be successful and where where are the demands going to be most critical for your race? So that's what I think about poles. With poles, there's a bunch of different styles of trekking with the poles. You can double pole, you can single pole, and you can kind of jog and just kind of pull every few steps. There's a lot of great articles written by I Run Far about poles. CTS also has a polling technique guide, as well as there's a bunch of YouTube videos that I've seen out there too, if you are wondering what the techniques for polling are, if you decide to use them. But
Sure.
again, I do think they're a great idea if durability in these longer races is your primary concern.
Absolutely. And just making sure that if you are thinking about it, that you're practicing them. And is it with anything else, you want to practice it before race day?
Absolutely. That is huge. I love that. Little quick anecdote about me. Last year, I attempted the Wasatch Front 100. I used poles in training. I thought I was going to carry them out to Wasatch and use them during my race. The way that my flight baggage happened and the cost of shipping poles out there and the stress it would have gave me to try to ship these things across country in order to have them for my race was just too much. So I was like, you know what? I don't need the poles. My race ended not because of not having poles. It ended because of the altitude demand and the stress of trying to run so hard for such a long time. I guess I just wanted to say that, in that anecdote, I was practicing with my poles and I was practicing without my poles just in case I had to sacrifice them, which I did. I never used them for the race.
Right,
So
right.
when you're training in the weeks leading up, definitely have sessions where you're using poles going uphill. Definitely have sessions where you're just using your legs to get uphill. So that way you can be efficient whether you have or whether you do not have them. I have heard of some races saying that you can pick up your poles, but once you start using your poles, you have to finish with your poles. So some people put them in drop bags at like mile 50, they grab their poles, but then they have to continually use them for the race. So that would be another example of being efficient both with and without, and understanding that we should be well-rounded runners, regardless of the equipment that we have on us, such as our poles.
Right. And, I'm just going to add a little to that anecdote. So I had a friend that took poles to go to a race. She got through a checkpoint at an airport for a carry-on on the way, but on the way back, they took her poles. She was not allowed to have them, on her carry-on. I think you can put them in a bag that you're going to check. So be careful with that too, because she lost some really nice, lucky trekking poles that day. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So they do, if you're going to be flying in for a race, they do require an extra logistical type of problem. So yeah, but just like you mentioned before, like practice with the equipment that you intend to use. Also, spend some time practicing without it, just in case you hit one of those scenarios. We
Right.
never want to be dependent on one particular piece of gear for a race. We want to have options. We want to be comfortable in different scenarios for sure as runners.
Okay, well, I think we covered hills. So we covered how you can use them in workouts, tips for running up and down the hills, some strength training you can do to add to your hill work, and what we can do as flatlanders. We talked about using them for flat races and hill races, and ended with poles. So I think go out and get some hills for breakfast or lunch or dinner, whatever your preferred time of the day is to run. Anything to add, Coach Reese?
No, you summed it up beautifully. Hill workouts are really important no matter what you are training for. Ask your coach, what types of hill training or hill workouts would be critical or good for you during whatever period of training you are in. Get out there, crush them. Hill work, man. I personally love it. That's why I trail run.
That's great. Okay, we'll see you guys. Next week we're going to take a break, but we'll be back the following week.
All right. Take care, Loretta.
Bye.